Beukes' WebTalk on OHS Management Systems. My name is Lorne Gosick. I'm the OC Program Manager at Beukes, and I'll be moderating today's WebTalk. With me is Heinrich Beukes, Director of Research Programs and Development at Beukes. We've had a great deal of interest in this series of WebTalks, particularly on this topic, OHS Management Systems. For participants, you can send us your questions online through the WebTalk software. For those with a microphone who would like to ask their questions live, please indicate this when you send in your question. Perhaps, Heinrich, you can get us started by describing just what is an OHS Management System and how is it different from a safety program.
I think it's a privilege being here, and it's a privilege speaking to our audience. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the term Health and Safety Management System. In essence, it's the development of a program, a health and safety program with interrelated elements or components that enables you to improve your safety performance over time. So in essence, if you talk about a health and safety program, it's elements that's designed to prevent accidents and injuries. And the health and safety management system, on the other hand, is a system that allows you to improve your safety performance over time. There's several systems out there, but they all are based on the idea of plan, check, do, and act.
What management systems and standards are out there? I've heard of ISO, CSA, OC.
That's a good question. The term Health and Safety Management System really came into being when a lot of international health and safety management systems was published. That's when the word was actually started to be used more often so than health and safety program. So one of the most common ones in use is OHS 18001. Now, some people confuse that with the ISO system. It's not an ISO system. It's not published by the International Organization for Standardization, but by the British Standards Institute. So it's a different management system from ISO, although it looks the same as what the typical ISO systems look like. There's also the CSA Z1000, which is almost a copy of ISO 18000, of OHS 18000. There's several other ones like BS 88000, which is developed by the Health and Safety Executive in the UK. There's also the one that's developed by the International Labour Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, which is called ILO OHS 2001. Then there's the ANSI Z10 as well. And then there's the International Safety Rating System that's published by DNV. Now, all of these systems, as I mentioned before, have been developed in the plan, check, act, do principle. So there's a lot of commonalities between all of them.
So an integrated safety program and safety management system.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's different standards, but they're all similar. They're all based on management principles.
Yes.
So how do you decide what management system is right for your organization?
It doesn't really matter that much because they're all based on the same principles. You need to decide what that system is going to do for you. The OC standard, for instance, has a little bit more to offer than your standard health and safety management system, as it integrates some other areas as well that's not specifically part of the plan and Q2 management philosophy. It includes specific control programs as well. There's been a lot of studies done on this, and Dr. Aswell Howard Bartley from the University of Jordan has done some studies in this regard, and he also recommended that the current management systems out there is not always enough to actively control all the hazards in the workplace. He recommends that you include some areas that's more specific to your organization, and that's what we've done in the development of the OC program. We've actually included some key areas like limits, workplace inspections, and so on. That's not part of other management systems.
So we're starting to get into the components of the OHS management system. Did you want to tell us what are the key components of a OHS management system?
There's basically 5 key elements in a management system that's based on the plan, do, check, and act philosophy. The first one is you have to have a health and safety policy in place. Without a health and safety policy, you would not have any direction. Yogi Berra, the famous New York Yankee baseball player and coach, is famous for many of his slogans. And one of the things that he said is, if you don't know where you're going, you won't know when you get there. And that's the same thing with the health and safety management system. Then you have to have a plan. That plan includes the assessment of your hazards. It requires a review of legal requirements, which is very important, and you also have to set objectives for the health and safety management system. Then you have to implement that plan. That's part of the do philosophy. That means that you have to allocate resources, you have to have assigned roles and responsibilities, you have to train your people, you have to communicate what the policy and standards are. You have to have documentation control, you have to have operational control, and you have to have emergency processes in place. Then you go into the check function, and that is where internal auditing comes in, management reviews, accident investigations. That's all part of the check philosophy. And then the act philosophy is you have to actually make changes as a result of your findings during that checking philosophy. Now what I've done is I've prepared a slide to help explain how these all interrelate. So if you can just get my slide, please.
It's coming.
If you look at this athlete here, these are international hurdler from China. He's a biomechanical system. In the same way, a health and safety management system is a system. This guy is a biomechanical system. Now, if you look at the person itself, you only see one thing. You just see the athlete. You don't look at you don't see the different elements that he's composed of. But let's look at him a little bit closer. Look at his face, for instance. You'll see the focus and the goal orientation. So that will mean he's focused on finishing the race. He knows what the goals are. He set his own goal. The same way you have to set your goal through your health and safety policy in your management system. Look at the hurdle underneath it. He needs to be aware of that hurdle. If he wants to successfully challenge the race, he needs to be very aware of that hurdle. He needs to know where they are, how high they are, and so on and so forth, how many of them there are, so that he can plan his strides and so on. Look at how his arms and legs are working. They're working very hard. Without the arms and the legs, the person will not be able to finish the race. His body is the center point of everything. That's an illustration of his commitment to his passion. That's your safety culture. And then lastly, you look at his overall performance as a result of all these systems coming together. In the next slide, I will just explain that a little bit closer. So his head and his face, that's your leadership commitment. That's the first part of the management system. You establish that by having a OC policy, health and safety policy in place, by setting specific goals, and by assigning a specific accountability to people. So that's part of the planning process. Then you look at understanding the hazards. You do that by looking at your people, your equipment, your materials, and your environment. Based on that, you can decide what the plan of action should be. Then you look at the arms and the legs of the individual. These are your health and safety programs as such. So these are things like WMS, hot work, fall protection, confined space entry, and so on and so forth. These are really the functional elements, the same way it's functional for the athlete. These are the functional elements of the health and safety management system. Next slide, please. Then you get your operational control. These are things that's not purely health and safety programs related, but these are the things that you need to have in place for the other programs to actually function. These are your supporting programs. Things like how do you decide on training requirements? How do you do record keeping? How do you purchase equipment that's safe, which is sort of separate and it's supporting to the health and safety programs and such. So in a way, you can now see the difference between a health and safety management system and a health and safety program. A health and safety program are those as a combination of all those specific programs like WMIS and HOTMIS and so on combined, and all these other elements now add to the system that make the program evolve and continuously improve. All of this will not function without a safety culture, a set of shared beliefs, values, and philosophies, and commitment and healthy attitudes is what drives all of this. If you have a procedure in place and the workers don't follow that procedure, as a result of a poor safety culture, your program won't work. So it's an integral part of a health and safety management system, and your management system needs to actually address this. Otherwise, you're going to fall short. And this is one of the areas where OC is unique. None of the other health and safety management systems specifically require you to look at safety culture. They acknowledge that it exists and that it's important, but with the OC management system, we're trying to track and improve safety culture performance as well. Last slide, last bullet there. And most important thing is the program evaluation. Oftentimes we see health and safety management systems fail as a result of not having a proper program evaluation in place. If you do not keep your program active, if you're not making sure that your policies and procedures are working the way they should, it will fall by the wayside and you will lose it. The evaluation process is more than an evaluation process. It helps to keep your program active and alive.
So again, that follows on continual improvement, which is, again, part of the management system.
Absolutely.
So
we can, I'm done with the slides, so you can put it back to the normal view. Thank you.
So you gave us, I guess, the 6 main parts of a health and safety management system. So how do you implement the OHS management system? You know, what is the first step?
Yeah. That's a very good question. We often get this question asked by our clients. It's such an overwhelming process, but where do I start? Well, there's a very simple process that we describe, and it's basically just 5 steps. We won't have time today to go each one in detail, but I'll just talk about them briefly so you have an understanding. The first step is securing management commitment and employee involvement. This is an absolute critical step in the whole process, because without that, your program is going to go nowhere. You won't see success if you don't have management commitment and employee involvement. And the employee involvement is almost more important than management commitment. In the end of the day, it's the people on the floor that get injured. So they need to be involved. They need to be completely immersed in health and safety. But they need leadership. If it's important to the leader, it's going to be important to them. So that's step 1. The best way to achieve that is by forming a steering committee that involves all the involved parties. Step 2 is assess your program needs. Now that you do by really truly understanding the hazards. Think back at the slide, there's the hurdles. You need to know exactly what they are, and there's various areas that you need to look at. You have to look at your physical hazards, you need to look at your health hazards, you need to look at your social environment, your work practices and processes that you currently have in place, and then also employee protection. That will help you to understand what your program needs are. Then you develop from that, now that you understand your hazards, you develop your different program components like limits and time spaces which are applicable. After that, you have to implement that, and we spoke about what implementation looks like. It's assigned roles and responsibilities, it's training, it's communication, and so on. So there's a difference between the program and the implementation. We oftentimes see with our clients that have wonderful programs that's developed, but it's not really being implemented. So we really need to focus on that implementation phase as well. And then lastly, but not leastly, you're going to be evaluating your program on a regular basis. It's important to do a management review and the operational review. So there's two areas at play here. It's what's happening on the floor and what's happening in the boardroom or in the management area. And you need to evaluate both to make sure that the program is properly implemented and continuously improved.
We have a question from the audience.
We have a question from the audience.
You used, and I have heard other safety professionals talk about the term safety culture. What does it mean, and what is its impact on a safety management system?
Safety culture is one of the key components of a safety management system, although it's not a requirement by many of the health and safety management systems out there. But safety culture is the way in which people act and the way that they think it's expected of them. In short, it can be defined as what do workers do when nobody's watching. If they have the common belief and the common value system, then the management team, you've got a sound health and safety culture. So it's not a component as such of the management system, but it's in a sense it's the driver. It's the attitude of the workforce towards health and safety.
Follow-up in somewhat of a humorous vein. Where do I buy one?
Well, unfortunately, there's no easy way. It's going to take time. It's going to take commitment. It's going to take patience. These programs you don't get a canned one. You need to develop it specifically for your organization. And PSMESA is here and willing, more than capable to help.
I guess that your last point there about being specific to the workplace, you mentioned earlier about the hazards to each workplace. You've got that work and the work site actually developing a program there, parts of doing the hazard assessment.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, you were saying how it's not a safety program, it's a specific one developed for the work site, because you mentioned it needs to encounter the work site and the hazards. So I was just following up earlier about how you mentioned the importance of having not a CAM program, it's specific to the workplace. Also, how do you obtain worker involvement in this process?
Well, the most important part, or the most important thing that you can do is to involve them from the beginning. You need to make sure that they are part of the procedure. If you develop a safe work procedure, don't develop the procedure in isolation from them, but develop it in conjunction with them. Make sure that you include their knowledge and skills into that process as well. Give them a little bit of guidance through either your joint health and safety committee or your health and safety manager, or even your HR manager or operational team. But make sure that you involve the worker at every level. One of the key things you can do as well is to include them in the steering committee, or include some members of the working of the workforce in your steering committee when you want to develop the program. That will give the workers on the floor the trust and the belief that the processes are truly understood, and that will make them involved.
We have another question. Another question from the audience. How long does all of this take? In other words, how long will a comprehensive OHS management system take to put in place?
I think it depends on where you are. Each organization is at different levels of development. Some of them have certain levels of sophistication already in place. Others need to develop it from scratch. I would say for a sort of mid-sized organization with an average kind of complexity of processes, with commitment and with assistance from PSMESA or another safety professional, you can look at more or less 2 years to develop a safety program from scratch. I just found, however, that many organizations have various aspects of the program in place already. So it could be something as short as 6 months or 9 months just to polish up a little bit and have a fully functioning health and safety management system.
You mentioned earlier regarding policy and leadership about setting goals. How does one go about setting annual OHS goals?
Very good question, Lorne. We see a common thread in our engagement with clients that they don't really know how to set goals. They don't really know how to plan for health and safety goals. They commonly look at how do we get the injury rate down, and they set that a specific number for the injury rate. That doesn't help a lot because it doesn't reward positive action. So your goal should be more around how do we improve safe behavior on the workplace floor. Don't look at it from a lagging perspective, but from a leading perspective. So you need to decide, we need to focus on let's say, on identifying hazards. If we can see an increase in identification of hazards, that's a goal that's attainable and it makes the workplace safer. Because more hazards has been identified. So those leading goals are more important and more relevant to setting effective goals for our safety. look at awarding effort and don't look at the result as such.
Okay, so that is where I've heard the term leading and lagging indicators. You're talking about leading. Give me other examples of leading indicators.
Basically, on every program, you can, on every specific health and safety control program, like women's or confined spaces or working rights, you can develop specific leading indicators. In other words, there's a requirement for fall protection equipment to be tested frequently. So your goal will be to track and monitor the testing procedures to make sure that those pieces of equipment are tested and marked as still functional or still meeting the standard. That would be an example of a leading indicator. So you're going to be looking at your tests, results of the records of your testing as a leading indicator. And you won't be looking at how many people have fallen as a result of not really putting the testing.
So making sure you're doing as you say you're going to do.
Yes.
Okay, it's part of a management system.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's where we get back to the whole idea about a management system and a safety program.
Yes, I think it's key to remember that all of these safety systems, they require you to state what you're going to do. And then when you are audited, you are measured against, did you do what you said you're going to be doing? So in many cases, the safety management system might miss something if you're not aware of what the things are that you should be doing. And hence, us including areas, specific control programs in the OHS program.
One more question from the audience. What is all this going to cost me?
Very good question. Typically, people, when they hear about all the work that needs to take place, they think it's going to be a lot of cost. In my personal opinion, there's very few things that need to cost a lot of money. Most of it is developing internal policies and procedures. Most of it will be time in lieu. In other words, it will cost time for people to work on developing policies and procedures. But in essence, you can have a management system being developed without having real extra cost. There will be cost for safety equipment and things like that, but that you have to purchase in any case. It's not as a result of the safety management system. It's purely as a result of the needs of your safety program.
We have another question from a caller that'd like to go live. Caller, you're live. Ask your question. It's Mark Conklin.
Go ahead. We can hear you.
Can you? I didn't actually want to go live, but thank you. What would be a way that you would recommend measuring safety culture?
So what would be a way of measuring safety culture?
Mark, thanks for that question. It's a very good question because it's fairly complicated to measure safety culture. There's a whole lot of areas that you need to consider when you measure safety culture. It's a little bit too complicated to go into in detail now, but you need to consider the workplace as a whole. You need to consider what is the organizational culture as a whole, not as it pertains to safety as well. In other words, you have a completely different safety culture in a hospital versus in a sawmill versus in an abattoir. The kind of people that those workplaces attract are different. You need to look at that. You need to look at perception surveys. Now, what does the people on the floor really think about health and safety? What do they think of the commitment of management? These are all things that you need to consider. You need to look at compliance levels. To what extent do people comply with safe work procedures? You need to look at to what extent do they comply with the regulations that set in company rules and so on. And then you get an overall picture or a big picture of it. To measure safety culture can take a long time. In many instances, up to 3 months to do a good analysis of safety culture so that you can truly understand what your safety culture is. The wider your approach, the bigger your net in evaluating your safety culture, the more opportunities you have to improve it. So you will find that maybe your hiring practices is not adequate to attract the right kind of people to your industry, and then you need to look at that. But if you didn't consider hiring practices in your net, when you were evaluating your program, you would never pick up on that that's an issue. So the wider the net, the more is your chances of success.
One more from the audience. How do I get the ball rolling? What do I do?
Well, if you're a FIOSA MIOSA member, I would say the first step is contact one of our safety advisors. They can put you on the right track. If you're not one of our members, I would say start with the hazard ID. Make sure that you fully understand your hazard, and then develop a policy so that you can move forward in that 5 steps that I've mentioned earlier.
Thanks, Heinrich. What are some of the common mistakes that people make when they develop and implement their OHS management system?
I think the key mistake that people make is they want to drive the safety program by themselves. When they do that, they develop a sort of safety island, which is a fundamental mistake. One person, one safety professional, cannot be safe for the whole organization. There might be 1,500 people working in the organization. There's no way that one person can influence what 1,500 people do. So I know safety professionals are often drivers, and they like to keep people to task when it comes to health and safety, but that's the wrong approach. You need to have a participative approach to ensure that that the system develops as a whole throughout the organization, and it's not a safety island. Another problem is management commitment. Oftentimes the workers don't perceive management as really being committed to the health and safety program, and if once that's perceived, they won't follow the safety rules. They need to understand it's expected.
A couple of really good points, Heinrich.
We have another caller with a question. Tim, you're live. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, I didn't know I was going to go live. Yes, so we currently have a safety program in place, and my question is surrounding the element of program evaluation. And so as we go about our review of the program, I'm not finding any specific trends. I'm seeing quite a few inconsistencies in the to find any specific trends. Do you have any advice for me on what to look out for and how to approach it so that I can find specific areas where I can begin improvement of my program?
So it's hard for me to comment on your situation. We basically need to look at exactly what the key issues for your program is. But we see typical areas of concern in dealing with so many clients. Some of the concerns are things like training on accident investigation. We see a lot of times a lot of people, a lot of workers and joint health and safety committee members are conducting accident investigations, but they've not been trained in it. They don't really fully understand how their work impacts the rest of the health and safety management system. Also, I would like to mention again about the leading indicators. How well are these reports, the accident investigation reports completed? How quickly are they completed, and things like that. It's all key in it's all things we typically see that's going wrong. I will, Tim, I know Tim personally, and I will come and visit you, and we can take a look at your specifics and I can give you some guidance.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Heinrich. In closing, our time is up. I'd like to thank everybody who participated and all those who sent in their questions and those that spoke live. Please have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you all in 2014.
Thank you, Lorne. It's a pleasure being here. Have a Merry Christmas, everyone.